In 2047, a colony of scientists, farmers, soldiers, priests, artists, and AI, all looking for a new life, landed on Mars. The mission was simple: to survive and establish a...
What happened?
To survive and establish...
We are so far beyond keeping it together.
To survive and establish...
Then you can come at me right now!
To survive. Marsfall, survival on the Red Planet. Marsfall is a science fiction podcast about the first colonists on Mars. Listen for free wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
Today on The Bill Kelly Show on 900 CHML.
Well, the Hamilton Commonwealth Games bid has pivoted once again. I know, this is a kind of an ongoing story. You may remember it was going to be Hamilton 100, of course, in honor of the 2030 Games, the 100th anniversary of the Commonwealth Games. And because the Games originated here in Hamilton, they thought the 100th anniversary seemed like a good fit. A lot has happened between then and now, and it looks like we're kind of back to square one again. Steve Milton, award-winning columnist for the Hamilton Spectator, writes about it today. The Commonwealth Games bid looks to abandon any bid for 2026 and looks to 2030. And Steve Milton joins us to talk about this. Milt, thanks so much for the time. Been a long time. Glad you could join us today.
It has, Bill. How are you?
I'm hanging in. Still working from home. You know, this is the new normal, I guess, for the next little while.
Yeah, huh? I'm sitting here in my home headquarters with the semi-panoramic view of Aberdeen Avenue here, watching the world go by without me.
It doesn't get any better than this. Let's talk a little bit about this, and the piece, of course, that you wrote gives us some good context about this. And as I'm hoping a lot of people can remember right now, the Games originated in Hamilton back in 1930. They were the British Empire Games back in those days, and there's a lot to be said here, as you've been writing about for the last number of years. As those games did, there's always the idea of legacy and things that remain. I mean, what was Iverwood Stadium became Civic Stadium was actually built for those games.
Yep.
Jimmy Thompson Pool, which is just a block away from there, was built for those games, and that's still there. It's been fixed up and all. So that's an element. But Lou Fraporti and the other folks, P.J. McKenney and some of the other folks in this, Steve, built a much more extensive picture as to what this games could mean for Hamilton. Now, where are we with this now, as far as council is concerned? Because there's a lot of players that are at the table here.
Well, there are a lot of players, and I'm not 100% sure where they are, but they want to present something to take to the we'll start with where we're at now. They're bidding only for 2030, and they're concentrating on that, and they want to get out there before anybody else even looks at it, because a lot of people will be interested in 2030, because it'll be an important product, because it as the World Federation has told me many times, anybody can sell 100th Games. It doesn't necessarily have to be, because they're centennial. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't have to necessarily be in the place where they're first held. I mean, the Olympics in '96 should have been probably in Greece. Of course, they didn't. They ended up in Atlanta, but they were sold as the 100 Games, right? The 100 Games, the Summer Games. So we've seen that can be done. So they want to get out in front of all that. They want to take the elements, a lot of the elements, and redo it. So what I think the situation is that the council would probably have to reaffirm, because the plan that they approved is not the same plan that they approved in principle back in late 2019, right? And the province also signed off on it as well, approval in principle. That's one of the first steps you need. And my guess is that they would probably need to re-vote on that, because it's not the same plan. I'm not 100% sure if that's the way it's technically. So they'd want to get that out there to council in the next little while. They haven't formulated all of what the revamped plan for 2030 looks like, but it includes elements of 2026. And as we reported, the central element of that is affordable housing. And that was not part of the original 2030 plan. It was the central legacy part of the 2026 bid, which became in part a 2027 bid, because the province wouldn't fund anything for 2026, and that's a whole different story. It's got to do with the World Cup in Toronto, all of that stuff. And the reason that they've got off of all this, to review for people who haven't read this yet, and gone back to 2030, is that the Commonwealth Games Federation, where it funds it for the world, it's out of London, has had some renewed interest from various places, including Victoria, BC, for 2026. Because if you get it and you have a good plan, you've got it. Like Hamilton did, it was their games. if we wanted it, right? So I want to emphasize something else too. I mean, I support games. I mean, a sports guy, but I support them because of the legacy. I'm actually very sympathetic and am kind of a bread not circuses guy, but I don't think you have to be one or the other, right? You don't have to be, you don't have to necessarily focus or get rid of bread because you're having what was sort of a circus, and that's what an athletic event is sort of cynically described as. And, and I get the point.
But Steve, when that came out, and I know that, when Mel Lastman was the mayor of Toronto and they were trying to go after the Olympics, that was the argument. Jack Layton actually was one of the guys that was leading that. Hey, we should be spending this on other things. And I'm leaning that way too, but I think you're right. You can have your cake and eat it too. I mean, have we learned from like the 76 Olympics where they built a whole lot of infrastructure that's sitting there empty right now, a velodrome that I think became a planet, I don't know what, and the Olympic Stadium. It seems as if it seems as if subsequent games have said, no, we've got to build something that can morph into something for the community. And you talked about affordable housing, for instance, where the athletes' village would go, but there's got to be more to it. But I got the sense when I was talking to Lou Fraporti and others in this bid that they understood that, and that's what they were trying to fashion here.
Well, and that's true, and particularly when they had to pivot so quickly and were asked to pivot so quickly, they changed everything around to try and make this a pandemic recovery, and of two things, like a redefining of the way industry is done here. There'll still be some heavy manufacturing, but some higher tech heavy manufacturing role, which is why MIP, McMaster Innovation Pro, whatever MIP stands for, which is an innovative thing, and the university's involvement and all those kinds of things was so important because it was going to need all of those things. It's not just about building things that stimulate economy, and this applies to 2030 as well. It's about making sure that you have all of the other infrastructure in place so that you can create, which we don't really have. We have to a degree, but not very much. Not enough as it should be, given our proximity to great airports internationally and nationally. We have a million airports around here, so people can get here easily. We're very close to a very, very large market and are part of a large market. And that is sports tourism. In other words, you have smaller events, but you can just do it just like that because you've set up a volunteer base. You've got a smaller arena or two. That new basketball thing they're hoping to get financed outside of the city, basically by Basketball Canada, if it should happen. It's still in the works. All of those kinds of things give you that kind of infrastructure that you could have, say, the regional this or that, or the regional swimming tournaments if you had a good pool to pick the Olympic team. All of those kinds of things which create the kind of jobs now that a lot of people are using to stay alive, Bill. Like students, part-time work, all of those kinds of things. And if you can do it, if you can create it so you're the place to go, and Hamilton's perfectly suited geographically for that. It also can stimulate, if you do it right, the upper end jobs as well. The construction jobs that last for months and months and months, but also the design jobs, the architectural things, all of the new types of things that could be used for that. And the bidding process, especially for the Commonwealth Games, they've changed the way they do it, and over the last 4 or 5 years, and a lot of it's sustainability is a big thing. I mean, you mentioned a few places, where the Biodome in Montreal, but there's more egregious examples than that. I mean, in Russia, you've got, and I was there for the Winter Games. You've got ski hills beneath the snow line, right? So they'll never be. You've got and stadia for the World Cup and some of it for the Olympics in Brazil that are.
Well, remember South Africa, Steve. They built these huge stadia for the World Cup of Soccer years ago, and those things are growing moss right now. I mean, there's no use for them now.
Well, that's right, and that's what everybody's saying. And the Commonwealth Games was way in front of that, particularly with a legacy and with a social legacy. They changed the way what they want to see, and a lot of it are social issues. Birmingham is a really good example of that. If anybody wants to search what they're doing, it's where it's going to be in 2022, and so. And that's why, Bill, now they work with. I mean, this was a necessity that the Commonwealth Games Federation, the Canadian Games Federation, the city, and the bid committee, which is a private, it's a private consortium and a not-for-profit, and has many volunteers to it. That's why they were working with them on this bid, and they will work on them with the 2030 bid too, because they want to work with bid cities in advance to say, so that the cities and areas and their provinces know what they're getting into. And so don't make a bid that you can't sort of back up and understand. Here's all the things you better have in place. And I think that's quite responsible of them. And then instead of here's the way, just for your listeners, I'll point out, here's the way it's normally done. And the Olympics is even changing now too, because they've already awarded a couple, right? And they're going to talk about 2032 pretty soon. Mm-hmm. So but they still do it this way. You make the bid, and then you either get it or you don't. They don't work with you till after the bid. I mean, they do some things. They'll come. They do site inspections many years
sure.
to all the bid cities and those kinds, but not the kind of hands-on thing that the Commonwealth Games is trying to do now. And the Commonwealth Games sort of has to do that because they're nowhere near as big as the Olympics or and that kind of thing. And people need to understand they are separate from the Olympics. Pan Am Games are connected to the Olympics. Commonwealth Games are not.
Let me ask you about the politics, because let's face it, it's going to be involved in this, whether you like it or not. You mentioned, for instance, that Victoria, BC has kind of stepped up and say, hey, we can do that 2026 game.
Well, one guy has so far.
Yeah, one guy so far. Yeah. But even if that were to happen, and I know you wrote in the piece that it's highly unlikely, and it's probably not going to go there anyway, but there are other bids for international games as well, and the protocol seems to be that if Canada has won games, they're not getting the other ones. Could we be
in their rules?
Yeah, exactly, and not just Commonwealth, but I mean, if the Olympics are here, the Commonwealth Games probably aren't going to be here either. That's just the way things go. Are we moving into a crowded environment right now where we've actually decreased our chances?
It's hard to answer that because you don't know, first of all, where a pandemic is going to take anything. And I mean anything, like, worldwide, all of those kinds of things where you can't. But no, one thing people don't understand is that Sport Canada has a policy of wanting to host, and I don't know what the exact number is, but wanting to host something major, and they mean these three and maybe one or two other kinds of sports, might be the Francophone Games, World Student Games, in Canada somewhere about every 6 or 7 years, right? Mm-hmm. So Hamilton, and it can get a little marginal if when Calgary was going for the Winter Olympics, that would have, from a federal standpoint, hurt Hamilton.
Yeah,
bid for 2030. I don't mean for 2026, but for 2030. So that could have affected Hamilton. That fell apart. So that was good, and the World Cup doesn't count in this. That's a whole different thing because they're not running the World Cup. They're just trying to get half a dozen games at the most. Mm-hmm. But it did cost Hamilton any chance to be involved in, and we wrote about it in the Spectator. And that's what. Oh yeah,
I mean,
a year ago now, right?
The World Cup played. Yeah, they played that card and simply said, we're going to.
They played that card without even having to.
Yeah.
But I did confirm from FIFA that they would play that card if they ever had to. So, So it's a really complicated thing. So the politics are at every level, Bill. You're talking city, provincial, and international as well. I think Canada hasn't had one of these in a while, so we might be looked at, especially with the centenary. There'll be a lot of people who want to look at the there's something about that, a kind of a sentimentalism, especially if you've been one of the Commonwealth countries that's been involved from the start. Hey, we'll go back to where it starts, and you can sell that. You can sell that in a whole bunch of different ways outside of the market that you're in. And you can sell it TV-wise and story-wise and all of those kinds of things. But there are a lot of, look how quickly the world's been changing.
Yeah, exactly.
Before then. And, costs can change. If I'm city council, I'm worried about certain costs because there's a second cost that's now been variable that you can't predict quite as much. Ever since, for sure 9/11. But even before that, actually since Munich, but really since 9/11, there's been a variable cost of how much is security going to be, mm-hmm. Because it changes, from 6 years out. You get these things usually 6 years out, right? And hopefully in the Commonwealth Games, they'll decide somewhere for 2030, they'll decide in 2023. They want to get 2026 set if there is going to be one. So what are they going to cost? But the second thing that's added now that nobody is really talking about, because we don't know, we're so new to this thing, is what are sort of health costs, preventative health costs, going to be by 2030? Probably different, maybe less than they are right now, but it's something that now has to be part of, and that's prevention or, being ready for another kind of pandemic, all of those kinds of things. That has, nobody talks about this, and nobody's ever mentioned this to me, but to me, that enters the equation as well. So if you're a city council, you want to make sure, and this came up when they were discussing, I think the 2030 bid the first time, is, that if there is a sudden, greater danger with security, the city council isn't the one for any overruns. If the budget is 1.45 or 6 or whatever, what it was going to be for 2030 before, then that's it. And the city share remains at this. That was part of the 26 bid, was to bring a lot more private investment in and maybe take some of the responsibility for those kinds of things back to the private sector. And I suspect, I haven't heard this definitely, but I suspect that the new 2030 bid will have a lot more. One of the elements they'll have in it from the 26/27 bid is all the stuff they've talked about for the last year, which is a lot more private investment, right? There's that whole fund that's being set up, and they have, that kind of thing. And private not-for-profit. There's obviously somebody's going to make some profits off this. Always do. Whatever you have, right? Whatever you build. If somebody builds a new mall, somebody around there, the gas stations around there, make a profit because they happen to be in the right place. So our job, yours and mine, and city councils, and everybody else who is to make sure that there's transparency through all this. I mean, transparency can really help with the politics of this, and it's really got to be transparent.
Absolutely.
Right.
More to come on this, obviously, in the days and weeks ahead. We're going to talk to Lou about this next week, I think, as well.
Sure.
A great piece in the spec today, Steve, give us the foundation for what's going on. Thanks so much for this. Stay well, and hopefully we can talk again soon.
Well, in person, Bill, at the stadium, one hopes, eh?
That would be nice. Maybe a football game or two this year. That'd be nice.
That'd be terrific.
Okay.
Right.
Steve Milton, of course, award-winning journalist and columnist with the Hamilton Spectator.
The Bill Kelly Show, weekdays from 9 to noon on 900 CHML.
For years, I've heard conspiracy theories about the Denver airport. Underground tunnels, secret societies, and even creatures hidden in plain sight. I never believed any of it till I started getting voice messages from strangers claiming to be entrapped in a labyrinth miles below the airport. I'm their only connection to the outside world, and what I've heard is terrifying. I'll share what I've pieced together, and maybe you can help me figure this out.
Listen to Escaping Denver, free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
Something is out there.
Please, help me help them.